plenty of other people I've spoken to, including a former CIA man I was in touch with this morning, said China wouldn't have cared two hoots if this case had gone ahead. Yeah. Everybody spies, and everybody knows that sometimes those spies get caught and that sometimes there are consequences for that. It wouldn't have embarrassed them in the slightest. What they really want is this massive embassy. This is a government that doesn't think the public has any right to know what goes on behind the scenes, and is taking voters, the media and everybody else for total fools on this.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm James Heale and I'm joined today by Tim Shipman, political editor of The Spectator. Now Tim, there is only one story in town, which is the China spying story. Tell us what has happened overnight. And this morning we've had an urgent question from Neil O'Brien to the government on getting the latest developments. What's happened?
Well, as Keir Starmer pledged at Prime Minister's questions yesterday, he said, I will release the evidence that we sent to the CPS on this prospective trial of Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry. He said to the House of Commons in PMQs that this would show that they had to adhere to the policies of the previous Conservative government in that evidence, because that is when the alleged offences took place. But what the evidence shows is slightly different from that, and they've now published it. First of all, it shows some really quite detailed information about what Cash and Berry are accused of. It says that Berry was in touch with a very senior person in the administration, someone who is regarded as one of the 4 or 5 most important people in China, a chief of staff to Xi Jinping. So that's very odd that a sort of someone at Berry's level was in touch with those sort of people. I suspect the British ambassador in Beijing would have been delighted to have that level of access. So that shows that people in Beijing regarded him as significant, and it shows communications between him and Cash, which suggest that there's one reference. Berry even says to Cash, you're getting into spying stuff now. So the kind of it shows what everybody I've spoken to in and around government and in the security services over the last few months believes was a case that was very much worth bringing to court. What it also shows is that the government have been telling the truth when they said that Matthew Collins, the Deputy National Security Advisor, provided what the CPS had apparently wanted, which was proof that the government regarded China as a threat. There are multiple references in his evidence to China being a threat. It seems to me, and people I've been speaking to this morning, that shows that had the DPP really wanted to bring this case, he had absolutely ample reason to do so. What we also know is that the government has now admitted that Keir Starmer was told several days in advance that this case was likely to collapse, and that the government then did nothing about it. The CPS was claiming that they were 5% short of what they needed, and the government then, which claims it wanted the case to be brought, did not then beef it up further. That's the next suspicious thing. Starmer told us on Wednesday that all of Collins's evidence was based on what the previous Conservative government, who were in office when this happened, believed. So were they or were they not a threat? We had to adhere to that. But yet the final statement that Collins provided to the CPS included chunks of Labour's manifesto saying that we want to be friends with the regime in Beijing. So that kind of tempered all the threats that he'd also included. And if anything, the final bits of evidence that were supplied watered down what had previously been supplied. So it is nonsense for the Prime Minister to claim that this was just the Tory policy that was being put over. And this raises the sort of what is basically the single existential kind of question about this, which is that, the government didn't really want this case to go ahead. They expect us to believe that Matthew Collins, as everyone says, a diligent civil servant, took these decisions all on his own, proactively went to the Labour manifesto and cut and paste chunks of it and put it into his evidence to the Crown Prosecution Service, and that not a single minister, not a single political aide, certainly not Jonathan Powell, his boss, had any input into this whatsoever. And yet we know that a meeting took place in which Powell and Oliver Robbins, the chief mandarin at the Foreign Office, had a conversation about this. They say it didn't involve any discussion of the evidence, but it sure as heck involved discussion of what our stance ought to be towards China. And really, we're in a situation where there was plenty of evidence to bring a case. The DPP had reason to bring a case, should he so wished, and the government, if they really wanted the trial not to collapse, could provide more evidence to do so. So today, we're back at square one, really, believing basically that the government and the DPP were perfectly happy for this thing to collapse. But yet what they've published shows that there was a pretty good case to bring. Obviously we should state that both men concerned deny any wrongdoing, and Chris Cash himself has issued a statement overnight sort of saying, well, you lot said we should be friendly with Beijing, and that's all I was trying to do. So I paraphrase, I should suggest. Those are not his direct words. But anyway, the whole thing's a right bugger's muddle, and bluntly, Starmer issued this evidence to try and put an end to this issue, and all he's done is raise yet further questions and cast further doubt over the position that the government has adopted from the start. And plenty of other people I've spoken to, including a former CIA man I was in touch with this morning, said China wouldn't have cared two hoots if this case had gone ahead. Yeah. Everybody spies, and everybody knows that sometimes those spies get caught and that sometimes there are consequences for that. It wouldn't have embarrassed them in the slightest. What they really want is this massive embassy, which is, they're trying to build on the site of the Royal Mint close to the Tower of London. People in the security services warn that underneath there are cables which supply the City of London. And from my piece that I've written in the Spectator this week, very senior people in the last government tell me that China is actively trying to sort of pre-position in British kind of cyber sort of places so that it can turn things off in the future, like turn out the lights or maybe turn off the entire financial networks of this country or something of that ilk. So to give this embassy the go-ahead is the thing that Beijing really wants. If Britain is to get any kind of financial deals that are beneficial out of Beijing when Starmer visits next year, they're going to have to allow this embassy to go ahead. That, in its sense, is potentially far more serious than what's been going on with this case. But what the case reveals is that this is a government that doesn't think the public has any right to know what goes on behind the scenes, and is taking voters, the media, and everybody else for total fools on this.
Very sorry to interrupt, but if you are a fan of The Spectator, then I'd love to recommend The Spectator's Best of Notes On, a new book edited by me, William Moore, and Gus Carter, and beautifully illustrated by Michael Heath. Best of Notes On takes The Spectator's funniest, sharpest, and most fascinating pieces on miscellaneous topics. So from Rod Liddell on quints, to Tom Holland on hedgehogs, to Julie Burchill on cocaine, Best of Notes On is sharp, unpredictable, and often very funny. It's the perfect gift this Christmas, so if you would like to order a copy, go to spectator.co.uk/shop to get a 10% discount if you're a Spectator subscriber.
So much there to unpack, but first of all, I'd say, is this government just simply operating as any other one would? You think the last government, there were issues around similar concerns about China. Is this a sort of about the individuals, or is it just the institutions really trying to act in such a way? Is it the Treasury driving policy? How much would this be different if we had, say, Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister rather than Keir Starmer?
Well, I think the proof is in what I've written this week, which is that it would be no different at all. Now, there is an argument that you can make that the previous Conservative government had a more hawkish stance towards China than this Labour government does. We know that when they came in, they thought it odd that Britain was not trying to do more diplomacy with China because, the Americans and the Australians, people who have a pretty hostile intelligence stance towards China, still talk to them. And, is the public not able to understand this? Are we not allowed to be entrusted with the information that, yes, we are seeking financial deals and that involves a certain level of give and take, but on this kind of stuff, we're not going to be compromising around it. We just seem to be in a total mess, not really knowing what the policy is. So look, on the policy front, I think there is a material difference between the two governments, which the Conservatives are probably right to point to. But in terms of covering up information about the extent of Chinese spying, they're both as bad as each other. And, arguably the Conservative government covered up even more egregious things than this one has. As my piece reveals this week, the cover story in the magazine, there are quite staggering levels of Chinese efforts. What we've learned this week is that a data center through which went a lot of secret information from Whitehall departments. I'm told some of it involving, which I've learnt subsequent to writing the piece, that some of it involved information from the government to special branch, which is the bit of the police that goes around arresting spies, pertaining to the extent of Chinese espionage in the country, was bought by the Chinese using a group of shell companies. So you have this sort of data portal that involves cloud storage and all the rest of it, and allows these messages to move from one place to another. And bluntly, we allowed the most hostile cyber state in the world to purchase it. It is quite staggering, and I've been tipped off about this by one source, but Dominic Cummings, who was also in the building at the time, this is all dates back to 2020, has written in his blog that he watched Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak open-mouthed as they had this explained them by the then Cabinet Secretary, Mark Sedwill, who doubled at that point as the National Security Advisor himself. So the establishment, if you want to call it that, just covered this up. I'm told also that during that Parliament, both the Ministry of Defence and Downing Street were hacked, both for technical and personal information. That broadly means they got into people's phones, which can be of use if one person is being indiscreet about policy matters or is revealed to be having an affair with someone. They are then potentially compromisable by foreign intelligence agencies. So both of those things are serious. And this is all of a piece. We know that Boris Johnson and Liz Truss were both warned by the former Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, that they needed to change their phones. Their phones could be compromised. It was reported at the time that Liz Truss's actually was. I'm told that's not definitively proven, but we know this stuff. But this data thing in particular is of an order that is, really, someone said to me, British spies would, chop off all their limbs to have that level of access to the Chinese government that we appear to have granted the Chinese government to the thoughts, actions and secrets of the British government. And the Cabinet Office has put out a statement this morning acknowledging that this is the case, but saying it wasn't the very most top secret information that was stored. My understanding is that some of the really very highly classified material was passed through this. Whether it was stored is a different matter. Really, they doth protest too much. They've basically coughed to it, and it's very embarrassing for everybody. But what it shows is that the people at the top, officials and ministers, do not think the public can be trusted with this kind of information, and would rather cover up a hideous embarrassment than come clean about it and do anything about dealing with the country concerned. And we've just had this Hillsborough law, which is basically about public servants having a duty to tell the truth. There is an exclusion clause for national security, but boy, have they taken advantage of that.
And just as a final question, Tim, I mean, it's difficult to predict with this stuff. On the one hand, it seems very complex, might not get the cut through it should potentially deserve. On the other hand, of course, it's very serious matters. Where is this story going to go? And I mean, there's some Tories who are saying quite hopefully that it could sort of bring down people in government. I mean, what's your assessment of that?
Look, I've been doing this 25 years, James. I'm always sceptical that these things are going to bring people down. It tends to require, I think what would bring down Jonathan Powell is some kind of email or proof that he in any way steered his deputy to do to put in what we now see was put in. If Keir Starmer can be definitively proven to have lied to the House of Commons, then I think that is very problematic for Prime Ministers, but we've seen in the past that they can come back and correct the record. I think the key then would be whether the Labour Party, being quite low on Keir Starmer at the moment and looking at the polls, then use that as an opportunity to say, how long would it be before people on the left started hitting the TV studios and going, well, actually, I'm as shocked about this as Kemi Badenoch is, and actually I do think the Prime Minister should resign. So that is a sort of scenario in which this could get uncomfortable for Starmer. I think the next shoe to drop is this embassy that we were talking about, because as early as Tuesday, Steve Reed, who is the Housing Secretary, in his quasi-judicial role, not in his role as a minister who wants to do business with Beijing, has to make a ruling on this planning application, which has been conducted, was originally rejected by Tower Hamlets Council, was called in by Angela Rayner, after President Xi raised the subject on his first phone call with Keir Starmer. As soon as Rayner did that, we then heard Starmer on a hot mic cozying up to Xi saying, well, you asked me about this embassy and now we've called it in. Look at us. Which does slightly suggest that they've given a nod and a wink to the people in Beijing that this is going to get the go-ahead. In a sense, when that drops, that will be a definitive action of a minister in this government, and that will blow this story wide apart again. Now, there's been some suggestion that this might be delayed, and it wouldn't surprise me at all, given the row that's running, if they sat on it for a few months. But it could come as early as Tuesday, and if it does, I think this is only going to get more awkward for Number 10.
Well, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to discussing all those future developments here on Spectator TV.